Quick introductions here. I'm Athan Stephanopoulos. I'm the president of NowThis, one of the executive producers. We have Tim Johnson, who is the director of the film. And someone who needs no introduction, Chris Hurst. We have one of each here. Unfortunately, you may have heard we're going to have Leslie Coburn, one of the congressional candidates here in Virginia, to join us today. Unfortunately, we are a few days out from the midterm elections, and she is on the campaign trail and had to cancel last minute. What we thought we would do is we're going to do a bit of self-moderation here. Wanted to spend a little time talking about how this film came together, but really also open it up to you for the questions here. We were just backstage as the credits were rolling, and I think for everybody who saw for the first time, for those who've been deeply involved in the film for quite some time, Chris, whose story this is, you can't get to the end and get emotional. So I kind of want to start first with Tim and kind of talk about how this came about. You know, why Chris's story? What made you drawn to want to put this into a documentary?
Sure. Okay, cool. We're on. First of all, thank you all for coming at this early hour. I wasn't sure how many folks are going to be able to show up this early after a football game, but I'm flattered. As far as how this came together, I'm from Salem, Virginia originally, and WDBJ is the hometown station. And so as soon as Chris made the announcement that he was going to run, I reached out to one of our mutual friends who also worked with the TV station, Alex Butler, who's here, and got connected with Chris, just to have coffee and chat, and I threw out the idea of bringing a camera to some of the things happening in his campaign, and to my shock, he was open to that. And so it kind of evolved and turned into one of these things where Chris kind of just never kicked me out, and so he may regret some of that now, but as things went on, the first thing that I was really fascinated by was just his decision to run. But as I started to see some of the things that were going on within the campaign, all the great work that the students were doing, and just the district itself, and it being a district that's divided in a state where a lot of districts, you're pretty sure which way they're going to vote because a lot of the districts are gerrymandered. And it was just a really fascinating story that I felt had to be told. So that's kind of what I found.
And Chris, I'm interested too. I know we've spoken about this a little bit and heard about it, but there were a lot of folks who were wanting to help cover this story. What was it, one, about Tim, and two, the access in which you gave him seemed very unprecedented?
I think maybe it was naivete that made me say yes to grant so much access, but really it was wanted to do a favor for my former 11 o'clock producer, Alex Butler, and take the meeting with Tim in the first place. And then Tim was very honest in not necessarily knowing what he was going to try and document or what he was going to film or what the story really was. He was curious in a premise, and I was kind of curious to see where he was going to go. So from there, we just let it happen as it came to us. Each time he came, he asked to do a little bit more and asked for a little bit more access, and we developed a relationship where there was trust. And I also really feel like accessibility and transparency and accountability in government is really lacking in a lot of respects. And here, even just in the campaign, we did stuff that I don't think you've ever really seen on screen before, right? Internal conversations about polling, about how we come up with commercials, about what we do when it comes time to do GOTV. And I think everybody should be able to see that side of a campaign, not just what campaigns present to you facing forward.
Yeah. I want to take a moment too and talk about how the film came to NowThis. For those in the room who don't know about NowThis, we are a digital news organization for young people, as you guys know well. Most of what we're known for is we're bringing shorter form news content into people's social feeds, particularly for a younger audience in that 18 to 34. And as we started to expand, we were working on a project with one of the executive producers on the film, David Check. a different project. And he called me and he says, I have something for you. I know that this is going to sound strange because you guys do more mid-form and shorter form content, but we have a documentary that I'm getting involved with that I'd love for you to see. So this was during the campaign. The film was not completed. And they sent us the teaser trailer. And I remember the moment we saw it, I just said, this is for us. And, you know, I'm sure there's many elements to the film that you see, and we'll get into. The strongest message, as we are now 4 days away from what many will argue is the most consequential midterms of our lifetime, is the inspirational effort that Chris and his team made in actually getting young people engaged and turning them out. And there was a moment that your campaign manager said that if we actually get these young kids between Radford and Virginia Tech to come out, this is not even going to be a close race. So that's what drew this film to NowThis, in which we've now actually put this film out for free online across all of our social channels. It's going up on Amazon this weekend. And we want every young person across the country, not just here in Virginia, to watch this film as a form of inspiration going into the midterms on Tuesday. But I bring it back to you, Chris. How do you feel now in the wake of the campaign and being first a journalist and now state delegate? How has being a journalist affected your role and how you're now legislating?
I think you can ask some of the lobbyists who have taken meetings in my office, you know, what it's like to have a journalist be in the room across from them. And that's just because we've tried to have a very similar approach to what I used to do, which is that we're open to everybody. I want to listen to everybody, I want to hear from everybody, but that we still would ask tough questions. And we did that a few times this year related to different pieces of legislation, utility regulation, prescription drug price transparency was a bill that I introduced where I had somebody threaten to find a candidate to run against me next year if I didn't back off. So I was like, well, if you're going to make me the #1 target for drug companies, I think that's a pretty good badge of honor to wear. So I was all right. So it's really, what I loved about working at Channel 7 for the times when it was really a great station to work at was every single time I had an idea for a story, I would go to my management and they would say, go for it. And pursue it until you finally have found the truth and you can actually report what you found. And that's what we do now when it comes to our policy and how we come up with our ideas, is really finding a problem and then just trying to come up with a solution, and now in the real privileged position to actually vote on possible solutions.
And Tim, one last question for you before we open it up to the audience. How did the film, and you went into it probably with one set of expectations, and now you have this. Give us a little bit of your reflection on looking at it from this vantage point now, from where you started.
Yeah, sure. Well, I'm just thrilled, obviously, that NowThis came on to try to get this in front of as many young people as possible, and it's going out to so much more of a broad audience than I ever really imagined. So that, from this vantage point, is something that is very cool as a filmmaker. But in terms of the story, I'm glad that you remember me being honest and saying I didn't know what the story was, because I think a lot of the first impression is really reflected in the film. A lot of media folks who come to Chris's story initially have a certain kind of set of preconceived ideas given Chris's story and the context of the district, like exactly, oh, this must be a gun control story. And there's a lot of context here for that, but the more time I spent there, the more time I realized that wasn't really what was happening on the ground, and it wasn't really why people were getting involved. Some people certainly, but the story of the campaign seemed to be so much more than that.
Well, I'll say one last thing, and want to open it for questions. I don't know if there's a microphone down there, but I say this over and over, that the message and theme of this film in many ways is a microcosm of where the country is today. And that's looking at we have now 4 million young people who are turning 18 in 2018. there were over 120 million eligible voters who did not vote in the last election. And seeing the campaign that you ran, again, with the expectations that it was going to be simply on gun legislation, but rather bridging the divide, reaching out to young people, first-time voters, and seeing the outcome, and kind of watching that suspense in that final night is kind of a hopeful reminder of where the country can go. So thank you both.
Yeah, and I would just like to say, kind of as an epilogue that we don't really get to discuss in the film, but the progression of all of the people who got active in the campaign to what they've been able to do since then. So I was the first Democrat to win for statewide office or for state legislature, the city of Radford, first Democrat in about 25 years. And all of the college students who worked on my campaign last year at Radford University, some of them like Jeffrey Perdone, who's here in the audience, worked on then the city council races. Stand up, Jeffrey. This young man is a real deal, and one of many who were just so genuine in their intent. And when we had Legion like that, we knew we were going to be unstoppable. So they worked on the city elections, and now Radford has the first Democratic mayor in a generation, democratically controlled city council, and so we've been able to move forward where now they're starting to get more experience campaigning. We have some people who went from being part of our field staff who then became field directors, people who were field directors now going to become campaign managers. And Elliot Smith, who you saw at Radford University, is now working for the Poor People's Campaign of Dr. Barber, in an internship here in Washington, D.C. Jack Foley, who you saw, was a governor's fellow in the governor's administration in the Department of Education this past summer. So it's about not only trying to get students active and motivated to work in campaigns, but then to continue to contribute to this democracy. We've seen it now in the years since the election. It's been amazing.
Well, it showed. It showed it in the campaign that you ran and the people you got behind you. So, do we have questions from the audience? Yeah, we'll start down here.
Congratulations, Chris. I'm not even from Virginia, and I'm thrilled for you.
Oh, it's a long drive then for you.
Maryland.
Oh, Maryland.
I wonder what's happening with the proposed pipeline in your district?
Right, so construction is still ongoing. Now this pipeline is an interstate pipeline that is in West Virginia and in Virginia. In West Virginia, the federal courts have said, well, so if you are going to do a water crossing for an interstate natural gas pipeline that's approved by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, each water crossing, the work that you're going to do, if you're going to cross a river or stream to put in this pipeline, you have to do within 72 hours. EQT, the company behind this pipeline, said it was going to take 6 weeks to cross 4 rivers in West Virginia. And now finally, through the courts process, they've said, no, you can't do any work in West Virginia. But there is still work that can be done in Virginia. What we have right now in our district is all of the pipeline is on stilts. They've already cleared out all of the trees. They've already gotten all the dirt dug. But these pipelines are on stilts with these fasteners to try and keep the pipeline together, because the grade is so steep that they're trying to traverse over the mountains that if they didn't have additional support, this 42-inch steel pipeline might buckle underneath the pressure of that grade. But it's all ready to go to lay in, and probably sometime when spring happens is when they're really going to try and put a pipeline into the ground and complete the project. But it's already been delayed because of the court process, because the federal courts have looked at this and have said, you haven't really done anything to substantiate not only the public use element of it, but also the environmental protections of this pipeline as well. The thing that I really need to tell people at the very macro level is that this is the dynamic going on. It's natural gas companies that are drillers, which is this company based out of Pittsburgh. They are drilling a finite resource. And they're also seeing finite amount of demand for their resource. So they're thinking, oh my God, we're a publicly traded company and we're about to lose our product. So how can we stay solvent and still give shareholders the dividend that they seek? Well, FERC has now rubber stamped these projects with a guaranteed rate of profitability of 14% on any natural gas pipeline project you choose to construct. So now they're going from the drilling business to the construction business, and that's a very profitable business model for them to do. It's the only reason they're building this natural gas pipeline. The other pipeline that comes in through this part of Virginia into Central Virginia, the Atlantic Coast Pipeline. The company behind that told our State Corporation Commission that they have 2 power plants but needed all of the natural gas to bring those power plants online from the Transco line currently in Virginia. But when they applied for the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, and FERC said there's no way we're going to have enough natural gas in order to bring these 2 power plants online. So they told the state one thing and the federal government the other thing, but those 2 agencies aren't allowed to talk to each other when they're approving projects. And so, again, this is about making sure people are at the table and not on the menu when it's corporate profitability and corporate greed that is really driving these decisions. And we're taking people's land as a result of it through eminent domain, where now some of these people live in an evaporation zone, where if a tragedy were to occur, they would be, as you heard in the film, vaporized. So there are still some pending court battles that are going on. There is still the ability for the state government to come in and ask for a stream-by-stream analysis individually, and I hope that that would occur.
Other questions? Yes, right here.
Tim, your documentary is excellent. Thank you. Chris, I want to thank you for coming to action. You lost a close friend in the Virginia Tech shooting. To see that you won in that district was very moving. I had a question. At the time we advocated in the Virginia General Assembly, the state senator representing Giles County was opposed to background checks at gun shows. So how do you straddle that issue in the Virginia General Assembly?
So there are views that are changing all the time when it comes to gun violence. Sure. The question, I think, is how do you juxtapose the state senator who represents Giles County is now for universal background checks. But the question is how do you balance not only my district being a little divided in how you approach that issue, but then what's it like navigating in Richmond? And I can say I believe the tide really is turning, because we're having some people that previously were just don't even come to us, don't even bother coming to us with sensible measures for gun violence prevention, now saying, hey, you know, that law that got passed in Florida and got passed in all these other states, that extreme risk protective order law, the one that Mike Pence endorses, the one that Marco Rubio endorses, maybe we can actually talk about that and having it come here to Virginia. So we are seeing progress on that specific piece of gun legislation. We've been working since we left the General Assembly on a Safe Virginia initiative that was organized by the House Democratic Caucus, where we've gone across the entire Commonwealth seeking input from people on what policies they would like to see us really be targeted and focused in what we introduce to try and actually tangibly pass meaningful gun legislation this year. A lot of people think it can't happen unless there's a Democratic majority. I'm really hopeful that even with Republican majorities in the Senate and the House, we can still pass meaningful gun legislation this year. Or in the next upcoming legislative session in 2019, I should say.
Somebody else has their hand. Yeah, over here.
Hi, congratulations, Chris, and Tim, this is a great documentary. On Monday morning, I'm going to go into class at James Madison University, and all semester I've been telling them about democracy and about teaching. These are about voting. These are freshmen who are 18 years old. It's their first time to vote on Tuesday. What message would each of you like me to take to them?
Show them the film first.
You know, I don't think, I think what is reflected in the film is that I had a message to spread about why people should vote for me, but then so many of the students, people who were impacted by the pipeline, people who felt like their voice had not been represented in Richmond, they really told me more about what they wanted me to do if I were to get elected. I have no other message to anybody who is eligible to vote and is registered to vote than to just do your civic duty and go out and vote. When we vote, we all win. When we participate in this democracy, we all win. You know, during this fractured time, people are wondering if our democracy is dead. It's not dead. It's not broken. It just needs more of us to be willing to participate in it. You know, it's a living, breathing organism, this thing, right? And it does better when more people are involved. And that includes those who are 18 and it's the first time able to vote. And they need to figure out what issues are important to them. So if anything, give them a little bit of the Socratic method and ask them, you know, what's important to you? What's an issue that matters to you? And then who's a candidate that reflects that value or represents the same view that you do? And if they don't know, then they need to research those candidates and they need to get out and vote on Tuesday.
I would just say, I think there's a lot of cynicism, and people don't believe that their vote really matters. And, I think a lot of young people, I read an NBC News article the other day that frustrated me so much because it said that a lot of young people don't feel like government represents them, so they're not going to vote on Tuesday. And I'm like, that is exactly why you need to vote, because when young people or anybody votes for the candidates that represent their values, that's when you're going to start to see it reflected in your government. There was a district for the House of Delegates last year that decided control of the House of Delegates, and it was tied. The House of Delegates, the control for Republicans was decided literally drawing out of a hat. So, you can't tell people that their voice, it doesn't matter. You really just got to do it. You got to do it.
And I'm going to add to that real fast. And I say it jokingly, but I say it seriously. What drew us to this film, knowing at NowThis the reach that we have with young people, and not just simply from a news perspective, but the fact that we recognize that they get informed every day. They get inspired by what we're putting in front of them. And the message of the film is reflective of that. And that is, when you get engaged, when you actually register to vote, when you vote, you can actually have an impact on getting representation that represents your values, as they did in Chris's case. We both know well, we're close to many of the students from Parkland. And I had sent a link to the film and showed them and said, I'd love for you to see this. The reaction from them, who in many ways are a great representation of how many young people today are likely going to go up and show up on Tuesday, was palpable. I mean, all of them sort of texted me saying, this film is everything. This film represents the message we are trying to get across, and that is, you have to show up, you have to vote. So we do encourage you to use this film as a tool to get out to as many young people and all people before Tuesday and beyond. This is, in many ways, this is just the beginning. Wow, a lot of hands here. We'll come over here and we'll come back.
Me? Okay. So you say during the film that you wanted to bring a journalistic ideals to your campaign, to be honest and straightforward with everybody and make it very digestible. I feel like that's also reflected in your filmmaking as well. But how do you guys combat these false allegations of fake news and things like that through your filmmaking and your policies?
I think what fake news really is fake news is propaganda. Not the news itself that's being alleged to be fake, but the mere allegation of fake news, I think, is the propaganda. And so it's incumbent upon people who have a voice and have a platform to push back against that at all times. I have a lot of people on Twitter now who thought that I was going to be independent-minded, and I still am independent-minded, but that they thought that I still wouldn't be hypocritical, or be critical rather, of those who disseminate and spread fake news, and that's starting at the top with our president. And so I'm very critical of him, and of anybody who wants to say that there should be violence against journalists, that anything that you see that's reported by a credible news agency that happens to be in conflict with your own opinion is somehow fake. That cannot be the narrative that we move forward with as Americans, is that in our discourse, if you don't agree with something that's proposed to you that's based in fact, that automatically your response is that it's fake. But it starts at the top, and it needs to be dispelled, and it needs to be admonished at every single turn. And I'm starting to get some flack for that I'm trying to call it out as much as I see it. But that's what I think you really need to do, what our news organizations need to do. I think but sometimes our news organizations don't go far enough to really tell the truth. Part of the reason why I love local news is I think local news needs to have complete, total impartiality. There's something still to be said for this site says this and that site says that. I couldn't do that part anymore. But when you have news organizations saying that our president is using racial language instead of racist language, that to me is also the mainstream media not going far enough and really trying to seek to tell the truth instead of just reporting one side.
So it was an amazing film. It was wonderful. I really appreciate it. And I was really struck by how open you were to behind-the-scenes kind of footage, very personal footage, brushing your teeth. I don't even know my husband's going to brush my teeth. But this may be a personal question. I'm curious as to what drove you to this particular path at the time of your terrible tragedy versus
So the reason why I didn't focus on one particular issue, whether it be gun violence prevention or anything else, I was the crime report reporter at Channel 7, so criminal justice reform is a big issue for me as well. But I didn't get involved with a particular issue because as a journalist I've reported on so many issues, and I loved that part of it, that it was a different challenge, a different issue every single day. But I also didn't want to continue in journalism because I really didn't want what happened to be a blip on the radar of my life story. That essentially I had offers to go to Los Angeles or New York or to go to a higher market. Some of them kind of felt like handout jobs, you know, to be honest with you. And I certainly had too much pride to accept that, but I really felt like it was going to be that my whole life's career that I would have projected for myself coming out of college and getting into local news would have continued on the same track as it had always been. And how on earth could I really live with myself considering how profound Alison's impact was in my life? So I knew that I wanted to make my life really be divided into before I met Alison and after I met Alison. And her death just set me on a new path where I had to do something different, but something that kept me in Southwest Virginia. And politics really seemed, ironically, like a natural progression. Taking a lot of the same skill set, being able to pick up information quickly, still telling stories of people that don't have a voice oftentimes in rural Virginia. And it seemed like a natural fit. And, you know, the first year is a steep learning curve, still kind of drinking from a fire hose, but we're learning how to become a delegate more and more each day.
Yes, please.
You have a very powerful message in this film about the power of young people and they pick it up and use it. There was a brief mention at the end of the film that you joined the Millennials Caucus. Tell us just a little about that powerful view.
Yeah, so the Future Now Caucus is actually a nationwide organization that is bipartisan, that engages with millennial state legislatures across the state legislators across the country. And it's kind of in its nascent stages right now, but what we're really trying to focus on, what are the main bipartisan issues that millennials care about? Climate change is one of them. College tuition affordability is another one of the main issues for the Millennial Caucus. So we meet regularly, and we'll be coming up with what our agenda is legislatively here, particularly in Virginia, in the next month or so. Delegate Sam Rasul at Roanoke City is one of the leaders of the Millennial Caucus, so he's really kind of been taking charge and formulating what we want to do specifically in Virginia. But I think a lot of us see politics as being very sports-like and being very team-based with your fidelity, you know, to one team or to another. And millennials don't have as much party identification as other age groups. They really just want to look at the candidate and don't really care whether or not they have an R or a D next to them. And I really think that that should be the approach moving forward, especially how legislators interact with one another. And we tried very proactively to be bipartisan in our first legislative session. I had someone with whom I did not agree with on 90% of the stuff that he introduces, but he co-patroned one of my bills to create an office for a children's ombudsman in Virginia, and then I co-patroned his bill that would have stiffened penalties on domestic abusers. So bipartisanship is alive in Richmond. It's working. I think with a Democratic majority, we'd be able to actually see some real progression in our policies in Virginia, but we would still keep that spirit of bipartisanship, I would hope.
A couple more questions. Way in the back. Two.
I'm from Maryland and don't know how it works in Virginia. How long is your term?
2 years, so
You're running again this year.
you want me to announce that I'm running for re-election? Yes, I'm running for re-election next year.
Do you have the camera on?
I don't know about this time, we'll see.
Do a sequel. No, but somebody very wise told me that you don't win re-election on the year your name is on the ballot. You win re-election when your name is not on the ballot. And so we have been having town halls in every single jurisdiction in the district since I got elected Giles County only gave me about 27-28% of the vote, but it's probably about 75% of our constituent service requests. And my Chief of Staff, Sadie Gary, does an incredible job along with me trying to answer those constituent requests, even from people who didn't vote for me. So, but to answer your question, we're a part-time legislature, so we'll meet for 45 days next year in January and February, and then the re-election campaign begins in early March.
Thank you.
Way in the back.
This is a two-part question for Chris and Tim. Part one is, what have you seen about the legislative process in Richmond that frustrates you? And for Tim, have you thought about making a film about the Virginia legislative process? Did you get the access to make that one?
You think you could get the access in the General Assembly?
I've already spoken to Chris about that, and he's not so sure. I mean, he says that he may be able to help with his end, but there are a lot of other delegates and senators that I think may be a high hurdle. But hey, if anybody can help make that happen, you know, I would love to do that.
So one of the phrases that I use a lot that is discouraging for me, but also really gives me resolve to how we can improve things in the General Assembly, and that is that there is really a mentality of don't give up an inch to save a mile by lobbyists who don't want to acquiesce on any possible bill that might harm their industry. Don't give up an inch to save a mile. It's the same thing with legislators too. Very protective, very defensive, but I really think having a different approach where you can be transparent, you can be bold, you can really trust in what you're doing to allow you then to be free to, I think, be your true self and operate as your true self as a legislator. But I will tell you that, you know, it is sometimes a very petty place, and with more young people elected, I think we would get the pettiness out of Richmond. One bill that was for Giles County was a tax bill that was proposed to me by the town of Rich Creek and their police chief, a town of 750 people, and he literally is like the Andy Taylor of that town, the only police officer for the entire town, and so therefore he's also the chief. He said, we're having problems collecting taxes on people who aren't paying their car tax bills, and it's really hurting our bottom line when we have balance sheets that sometimes can be very narrow margins. We need these people to pay their taxes on time. There's a loophole in the state law that is currently allowing them to go title and register other cars while they still have cars for which they owe taxes. So we closed that loophole, but because I had shown up in a Senate committee meeting the first week of Richmond, which was Republicanly controlled, apparently that's a faux pas. It's one of those many unwritten rules in Richmond that I just wish somebody had told me, but therefore then there wouldn't be an unwritten rule. So the Republicans, when that piece of legislation came over, I'd already gotten 3 bills out of the House, and 2 of them signed out of the House to be signed by the governor, out of the Senate to be signed by the governor into law. So they already wanted to kill this piece of legislation because I'd already been too successful as a freshman Democrat. And then they said that I had also committed this faux pas of showing up in the committee meeting the first week, and that they were going to kill my bill just out of that, you know, because I didn't show proper decorum. Well, this bill is very important to Giles County, very important to a lot of rural localities and towns. And I had a lobbyist. Lobbyists can be used for great devices. He came up to me and he said, Chris, this is what I'm hearing, that if you write an apology note to every Republican senator in that committee, they will get that bill off of life support and out of the Senate, and you can get it signed into law by the governor. I said, an apology note? Are you kidding me? I gotta say I'm sorry for doing something I didn't even know was wrong, and I'm a delegate. I can't go into a Senate committee meeting, but that's the way things are sometimes in Richmond. And so what did I do? I sat my ass down and I wrote out 20 apology notes because I needed to get this thing out of the Senate so that it could be signed into a law. And so there is some pettiness in Richmond, but if you are able to humble yourself enough to actually work within the process, you can accomplish things. And so by percentage, you know, I got more of my legislation passed than any other freshman Democrat except for one. So you know, we try to be successful, even if that means having to eat a little bit of crow and being humble.
Couple more questions. Yeah.
I think a theme we see a lot today is that like America is more divided than ever, and you know, I think we can feel different ways about that. But I think the film showed that something you were really good at was having conversations with people with
Yeah, so I tell people a lot of time that you have to love the sinner and hate the sin, because there will invariably be people who vote for me and hold their nose at it, because I'm a pro-women's choice and they're not, or have a different viewpoint on that or any other issue. But as a journalist, when I was going to somebody's home, either at the best of times or the worst of times, or something that happened in their neighborhood and going up, you're talking to all walks of life the entire time. And if I needed to then get an interview out of you, then I had to talk you out. I had to try and, banter back and forth with you a little bit. I had to open you up a little bit and try and get you comfortable. And one of the things that I found really reaffirming during the campaign, that I was really questioning after everything that happened to me and Alison and Adam in 2015 was, do I even like kind of the basic principle of journalism, which is that you have to really love people and love telling the stories of people. And I found out really quickly, door knocking, that I really genuinely do like people, and I like talking to people. And so I was trapped in my box for 5 hours a day, calling up people for money. Some of you may be here in this room, and you have to do that in order to raise the kind of money that was necessary. But then my reward for being locked in that box for 5 hours was I got to spend 5 hours walking and talking to people from all walks of life and listening about issues that were important to them. And even if somebody, I never had any adverse incidents when I was out knocking on doors, but I have had guns pulled on me when I was a reporter. So it's kind of like there really wasn't anything you were going to be doing to me at a door that was going to be anything more than what I had already seen on the street. So that kind of gave me, I think, a sense of fearlessness to be able to go up and try and have meaningful conversations with anybody.
One more question? We'll take right here.
I hope you don't have any regrets about the ads you did with a great conversation in the film. One of the things we need is the kind of transparency that you get from campaigns. And there's nothing wrong or dirty about pointing out how people vote if they're not voting at all. We need to have representation, and you're not getting it from people who don't vote.
Yeah, and that was what everybody was saying to me when it came to the particular piece of opposition research that I found on my own and from a source who gave me this information. And one is did we really need to bring it up, or could we just talk about ourselves? But part of a campaign is you have to explain to the voter why the person in office has to be fired, right? It's a 2-year contract, and every 2 years, that contract comes up. And so a lot of people, and I do agree with this begrudgingly now, that the ad we eventually did was not a negative ad or an attack ad. It simply was just holding him accountable for his record. I could still kind of do without the whole voice of God trying to intimidate or strike fear, the way we frame them in the black and white. And I really, was surprised that we didn't do prison bars, and that kind of thing, because everybody else seems to want to do that. And the things are ridiculous right now, for Leslie Coburn, calling her un-American in ads like this. It's ridiculous. We saw last year the ad that Ed Gillespie used, saying MS-13 is going to overtake Virginia if we elect a Democrat as governor. Those ads are out there, and they will continue to be run as long as polling shows that they're effective. And so I think if any of you are ever called by a pollster, please let them know how you feel about negative ads, because that may be the only way we can change these things, is if people continue to say that they're non-responsive or actually have the opposite effect of what was intended.
Well, with that, we want to thank all of you who came out at 10 in the morning to be here to watch it, and of course to Tim, the filmmaker, and Chris.